and wasn't going right. Now, did rabbis do that as a regular perspective? I don't know how many rabbis had 5,000 people hanging out with them. And so you can imagine right now, Jesus is not the Messiah. He's the candy store, right? And everybody in town wants candy. And so as he's walking, they're just trying to shake him. He's the bank. He's the candy store. He's the RX. Jesus is just walking around, and these people want him for one reason. This guy just turned 5 loaves of bread into 5,000 people worth of food. We should hang with this guy. I was sick, and now I'm well, right? So right now, it's not a perspective of who he is. There's something bigger going on, right? And I think it's funny. You'll see the perspective that these people are getting here. So it says, so Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them should have a little. So 8 months' wages is not enough to feed this one meal. And one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, here's Pete, right? Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? I think it's funny that here you have maybe a sarcastic Philip saying this is just an impossible feat, and then you have this one guy at least taking a 1% step and saying, we have this, but I'm pretty ashamed to bring that to the table. We'll just turn it off. You guys got the picture of C, right? C gallon. You memorized it. Okay. So he brings what he has, which is interesting. And so he's got 5 loaves, 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? Then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Try not to forget that picture. I think I even need it again. Maybe Miller, you can work that out. Yeah, we need that again. Maybe you can sit there and just touch it every now.
Hey, buddy. So how many people do you think there were really there? Because if there's 5,000 men.
Where are we at?
It only mentions men in the numbers.
Yeah. So assuming it was a family vacation, we'll add a little bit
All the
more.
women were in the kitchen.
Huh?
All of them were in the kitchen. I forgot about that.
Always depend on Seth. All the women need to gravitate this way and all the men this way. Women, and we'll just get all the women over here with Seth. Bury him alive.
I take it back.
Okay, so Blazer and I were having this discussion even, I think yesterday or today or whatever, just, when it says men, you always kind of wonder, is it just the men cruising around or is it obviously the women too? I would have recommended just in my thought, yeah.
Well, because in Matthew, with the same story, it said 5,000 besides the women.
It says besides in
It
it?
says the number of those who ate was about 5,000 men besides women and children.
So you asked me a question and you knew the answer.
No, I don't know. I want to know how many you think.
So now that there are besides women and children, we know there are more. Okay, so there's a lot. I don't know. Assuming that the Jewish people were obeying the commandment of be fruitful and multiply, they probably all had 12 kids.
Okay. So how much?
Okay, so I don't know. There was a lot. But you are heightening the story because now I'm even more influenced by Jesus was able to feed more than 5,000. Okay, but women and children don't eat. It's always the men. Okay, so then Jesus took the loaves. He says, make the people sit down. And there's this grassy area, so they were into it. Jesus took the loaves. And when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples. And the disciples took those sitting down. Let me read this over. He distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. The first thing that came to my mind when it said gather up the fragments, right? That remain so that nothing is lost. And then you see in the next verse, therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments from the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. And the first thing that came to my mind, just from a Jesus perspective and how he's trying to help these people understand who he is. The way I see Jesus is, I've invited you all to the table. There's plenty of me to go around. And you're going to see Jesus in just 1 minute is going to dive into helping you understand that he is the bread of life. Unless you eat of me, right, you're not part of this game, right? So he's trying to say, listen, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. That's where he's going. So he's got this bread correlation, and he's trying to get these people to understand this. And so when I looked at this, he's saying, I'm showing these people that my arms are this wide. And I want you to all to come. There's plenty to go around of me, right? And then I think it's interesting that he has to have 12 baskets left over. Who in the future would this possibly represent? In the end times in Revelations, it talks about what? The 144,000 that are 12,000 from each tribe. And so am I making this up? Absolutely. But the perspective is I can see him saying, listen, not only is there enough, but I'm trying to save some. There's plenty to go around for the future too. You know, I have bigger plans than what's just in front of me. It's not just these. There's more that I'm looking to get. Remember, Christ desired that none should perish, right? So he's got this perspective. I would love to invite you all to the table. There's plenty to go around. Does that make sense? And so he's going to even get even more spiritual in the fact that he's saying, listen, this is a spiritual lesson, right? And so possibly is there this, that looks great. Is there this perspective of, I'll just touch it every now and then.
I just stay on.
Oh, you just did? Okay. Thank you. Anyway, I won't beat this dead dog, but nonetheless, the perspective is Jesus is saying, listen, not only was I able to take this little bit and show you that I can feed everybody, but I'm also saying, listen, I'm not just done with you. I'm thinking about others. There are others on my mind, and I will find them too, and I'm going to ask them if they want to sit down and be with me. And so, where are we at? Okay. So he'd given thanks, he broke the bread and fed these people and says, listen, make sure that, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, truly, this is truly the prophet who is to come unto the world. Now, if this were a Jewish people group, and they're saying, this is the prophet, who are they referring to?
Moses.
They're referring to the story that Moses had taught them as a little child, right? Their dad had said, hey, we got to reread these stories, it's part of who we are. And so Moses says, there will be one like me that will come, and he'll just be the man, and that's the one you need to look for, right? So they're going back in time in their heads and saying, this is the story we've all heard about. Now, if it's a bunch of unbelievers too, then you have, maybe they're just standing there going, what prophet? Or possibly like the Samaritan woman, totally not Jew, but yet totally had the same storyline, basically saying, listen, this is Jacob's well. Our fathers taught us about him, right? And so they had this other perspective where they had understood the stories and maybe were waiting for the same prophet as well. So you have that perspective as well. So anyway, it's referring to that Moses story. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Jesus just got done laying the smack down, right, on their perspective of who Moses was, didn't he? In the last chapter. Moses, he's like, listen, if you listen to Moses, you would know of me, but you don't. Your faith is in Moses, you're going to live by the law, you're going to die by the law. That's the way you want to work it. If you understood Moses, you would understand that his writings are of me. This is what Jesus is saying, right? And so you can see this perspective they're trying to get in here, and says, they have this story in their head of what Moses had always talked about, right? But like we all do, we just kind of take a little snapshot, a little cut paste of the scriptures that we like, and we try to make our own Messiah do what we want. Am I correct? So they're thinking, wait a minute, this is the one Moses spoke of. Snap, crackle, just get that right here and put it right here. Let's make him king. Not remembering that the law also was carried by the prophets. And the prophets spoke of a particular day. What day would that be coming in the future when Jesus would ride the donkey in? Palm Sunday. Jesus cruises through. He enters through that sheep gate, not the gate of choice. Same gate that all the just the social outcasts